Hello. You've caught me thinking back to the good old days.
And surprisingly, not my early childhood, as much as I like the idea of being cared for around the clock. No, today I'm thinking about my teenage years, where it really felt like anything was possible. I was freer than I'd ever been from the loving shackles of my parents, and terrifyingly adult propositions like university applications were just a glint in Father Time's eye.
And what better way to see in this radical new era of my life than by getting a newly released PS2.
Launching on the 24th of November 2000, I was nearly 14 when the revolutionary new PlayStation came out. And I do mean revolutionary, because it was a leap forward in every conceivable way. Most of the things we take for granted in the PS5 see their first appearance on this beloved console, and sometimes it's good to remember that, as well as reliving the warm and fuzzy feeling of being on the precipice of the best life would ever be.
So, in the spirit of distracting myself from the terrifyingly relentless passing of time, here are 7 things only people who grew up with PS2 will understand.
The feeling of turning on any console for the first time is breathtaking, but everyone remembers the first time they heard that sound and saw the original PS1 logo appear on a screen. And you probably believed that until you got the PS2. You believed it when tearing through the box like a wild animal, and when you were marvelling at the sleek new paint job, and when plugging in all the newfangled cables. You probably still believed it when you pressed the illuminated power button and watched it turn green. But then... just look at it. The drama, the graceful twists and turns, the rise and fall. It's a cosmic ballet of celestial proportions, knowing those gleaming pillars are your saves, digitally represented with all the power of a physical monument. And that glorious noise, like the tide of a faraway planet gently exhaling as you bleep and bloop your way through the crystalline settings menu, only to retreat to the comfort of the memory card screen. Even after 25 years, it never gets old.
Unlike us.
Isn't it amazing how all-encompassing technology has become? I know I sound a bit like an old man when I say this, but the idea that you could play a game like Jackbox with up to 10 players on one console via mobile phones over the internet would have been inconceivable to 14-year-old me. Especially when 14-year-old me had a hand-me-down phone with no camera.
But you know what did have a camera? My PS2.
Ah, the iToy. It's easy to look back and laugh at how primitive this feels now, but iToy was a literal game changer, and not just because you got to watch your grandma karate chop ninjas after Christmas dinner.
Honestly, it was like she'd been choreographed by Yun Wo Ping.
Slapstick hijinks aside, the iToy was so much more than a social game. The motion controls were rudimentary by today's standards, of course, but back then just navigating the menus felt like being in Minority Report. You could make video calls, not that I ever did. Being able to use the camera to put your actual face on a character in a game is still cool to this day, if somewhat cursed.
Although having said that, if there is one person who can pull off flailing about on the iToy and still seem completely, authentically themselves, it is Rosie.
The third thing only people who grew up with PS2 will understand is the mind-melting euphoria elicited by this most simple of 90-degree tweaks. The PlayStation Family logo on the PS2 disc tray could be turned so as to always be facing the right way up, regardless of whether you chose to display the console horizontally or vertically.
I don't remember this being in any of the manuals. It was like an Easter egg you only discovered through being told about it by a self-satisfied friend.
a secret the knowledge of which granted you immense power. The power to be that self-satisfied friend who went around blowing minds and spreading the good word.
And there it is. I bet you didn't know you could stand it vertically.
I bet you didn't know that you can do this. Whoever thought of that, honestly, deserves a statue outside PlayStation HQ.
Another thing we take for granted is how much a modern PS5 can do in terms of being an all-encompassing media unit. Back in the PS1 days, CDs were the most futuristic thing, and as PS2 arrived, the VHS still reigned supreme when it came to video.
But things were about to get a whole lot shinier.
Because PS2 games were based on the DVD format, it meant that the PS2 could also play regular DVDs, as well as keeping the CD functionality from its predecessor. Essentially, it was the dream of any teenager. Music, films, and games. And one device to play them all. Process. If you had a PS2 and your friends didn't, you were the ultimate ruler of the sleepover. You could browse your extensive DVD library.
I had 4, only 3 of which were The Lord of the Rings.
And choose what you wanted to experience in pin-sharp 480p. You could skip straight to the Battle of Helm's Deep and watch your favourite bits with one click. Legolas surfing on a shield, Aragorn's return, Gimli being tossed, no rewinding required, and then just swap the disc out to play Final Fantasy X or whack on that Eminem CD your friend had brought round and hope your mum didn't hear the swearing. What a time.
I had never felt so powerful in my entire life.
Another old man moment incoming. In the olden days, when everything was black and white and sending text messages cost 10p at a time, you had to have people in the room with you to do multiplayer. Until one day, you didn't. For me, that day was at university when I played Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence after my housemate showed me how to plug an Ethernet cable into the back of my PS2.
In my defence, I didn't even know what a network was.
What a life-changing moment that was, realising that the internet wasn't just for looking up game walkthroughs or sending rude messages to my friends. The possibilities felt endless. Any game displaying the blue bar of promise meant you could play with real people all around the world. PES went global. You could fight large-scale battles from your living room, assuming you had an internet connection fast enough and that your parents didn't need to use the phone at the same time.
To this day, I have not forgotten the joy of playing Metal Gear Online for the first time, nor the pain of seeing my enemies salute my headshotted corpse.
But now online gaming is the norm, and because it's normal, we forget the life-changing impact it had back on PS2. That's why we have to look back and remember to remind ourselves how far things have come.
And definitely not because growing up is hard and scary and I'm trying to find comfort in the memory of my youth. Definitely not. No way.
Next up, fond memories of a time before everything was hooked up with the sleek, solid security of the now ubiquitous HDMI lead. Back in the early 2000s, it was often touch and go whether or not your PS2 would successfully beam onto your TV, what with the combo of composite lead,
yellow for video, white for sound, red for other sound,
and SCART adapter. What you used was dependent on the TV you had. I had a SCART, and there was something compellingly alien about the gaping, toothy maw of this thing, an aggressive snarl of spiky metal ready to chomp the PS2 into the back of your TV.
I remember the feeling of shoving this thing in, like half excited by the power and heft, half terrified for the safety of my 15-inch JVC.
Sometimes it wouldn't work, and you'd have to wiggle it and wobble it, a disconcerting scraping sound making you wonder if everything was about to break forever. And then, if that didn't cut it, you'd have to take drastic measures.
If that doesn't work, I am out of ideas.
Boring, reliable HDMIs. You'll never have to blow on one of those. Our final entry is a bit woolly, but indulge me, won't you? The last thing only people who grew up with PS2 will understand is experiencing that leap from PS1 and the seemingly impossible graphics that to my year 2000 brain were practically indistinguishable from reality.
I remember a magazine screenshot featuring Tekken Tag Tournament 2 and the caption simply reading, "Look at Jin."
You could see the drawstring on his combat pants. You could see individual strands of hair. You could see his nipples. It was breathtaking and utterly unbelievable. I remember the infamous Metal Gear Solid 2 E3 trailer and thinking there was no way graphics could ever get better than this. And then watching my friend actually play the game for the first time. The cutscene where Snake leaps off the bridge onto the tanker.
As one, my friend and I both said, "Oh my God."
The transformation of GTA from the top-down impressionist style of the PS1 games to a fully explorable 3D world in GTA 3. The outrageously cinematic action of God of War. The PS2 era made my brain fizz. This was where video games took their first step towards what we've got today. Being there, experiencing that evolution, is something I will never, ever forget. And that was 7 things only gamers who grew up with PS2 will understand. If you understood these PS2 references, then make sure to like the video and leave a comment about which thing made you the most nostalgic. Then make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell to stay up to date with all things PlayStation, including more lists like this every Friday. See you next week.
PlayStation